Module will be discussing the recent developments in the diagnosis and management of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis and allergic fungal sinusitis. Allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis or ABPA is a condition in which the Aspergillus fumigatus colonizes the tracheobronchial tree of patients with asthma and cystic fibrosis with little or no tissue invasion by the organism, meaning that it is an immunological response to the antigens which are released from the fungus. On the other hand, allergic bronchopulmonary mycosis or ABPM is an ABPA-like syndrome caused by fungi other than Aspergillus fumigatus. The interest in this entity stems from the fact that the condition responds remarkably to glucocorticoid therapy. In fact, early detection and treatment can eliminate the risk of progression to end-stage fibrotic lung disease. Moreover, there are an estimated 5 million cases worldwide, making ABPA the most prevalent of the Aspergillus-related disorder. Now coming to the burden of ABPA, the community prevalence of ABPA remains unknown because of the lack of population-based studies. Data from sequential secondary care cohorts suggest a prevalence of about 2.5%. Majority of the data is from the tertiary care, which unfortunately is not representative of the general population. So this is a forest plot which shows the prevalence of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis in the tertiary care asthmatic population. You can see that the prevalence of ABPA is about 13%. This underscores the need for routinely screening all asthmatic patients for ABPA in the special asthma or chest clinics. Now, in a scoping review which was performed by the Manchester group, they estimated that there are about 193 million adult asthmatic patients worldwide, and they assumed the ABPA prevalence of about 2.1%. And with this estimates, it was shown that there are about 4.8 million ABPA patients globally. Now this table shows the studies which are conducted in this millennium. As you can see, majority of the data is from the Indian subcontinent. The other important point is that the prevalence in the Indian population is 5 times higher than that in the other populations. So we have recalculated the burden of ABPA in the Indian subcontinent, and assuming the ABPA prevalence of about 5%, there are about 1.4 million asthmatics which suffer from ABPA in India alone. Now coming to the pathogenesis of this disorder, despite 6 decades of research, the pathogenesis of ABPA remains unclear. What we know is that Aspergillus fumigatus colonizes the tracheobronchial tree of patients with asthma and cystic fibrosis. During fungal growth, several Aspergillus proteins are released, which not only activate the epithelial cells but also damage the bronchial epithelium. This leads to influx of inflammatory cells with the release of inflammatory cytokines. The normal response of the human host to Aspergillus is a Th1 response. However, in patients who are destined to develop ABPA, there is a profound Th2 response with the release of Th2 mediated cytokines. This causes eosinophil influx and release of IgE with the characteristic pathology of ABPA. Because not all patients develop ABPA despite being exposed to the same environment, we investigated this factor in a prospective case-controlled questionnaire-based study. This questionnaire inquired into the living conditions, the use of water coolers, the type of fuel, contact with farm, cattle and pets. We included 200 subjects with asthma and about 100 patients with ABPA. Interestingly, in this study, no particular environmental factor was identified. This suggests that environmental factors are not the primary pathogenic factors in the causation of ABPA. Several genetic defects have been identified in ABPA in the innate arm as well as the adaptive arm of the immune response. Unfortunately, these are small studies. In a recent large study which employed genome sequencing, 3 single nucleotide polymorphisms were found to be significant after multiple testing. These included SNPs in the IL-13, the IL-4 receptor and the TLR3. The former 2 genes are associated with adaptive immune response and the latter one with the innate immune response. Now coming to the diagnosis of ABPA. The diagnosis of ABPA is currently made on a constellation of clinical, radiological and immunological findings. The most common presentation is with poorly controlled asthma. Other common symptoms are low-grade fever, hemoptysis, productive cough, weight loss and malaise. Interestingly, in a study where we routinely screened all asthmatic patients for ABPA, we found that almost 19% had well-controlled asthma. This suggests that symptoms are a poor guide to diagnosis of ABPA and underscores again the need for a better diagnostic testing. The Rosenberg-Patterson criteria have been the most widely used criteria for the diagnosis of ABPA. The Patterson criteria include 8 major and 3 minor criteria. Unfortunately, there are several problems associated with this criteria. There is no agreement on the number of criteria which should be present to make a diagnosis. It gives equal weightage to all the components of the criteria, while we understand that some components of the criteria are more important than the others. Moreover, there is no consensus on the specific cutoff values for various immunological tests including the IgE levels and the eosinophil counts. In this context, the International Society for Human and Animal Mycology has formed an ABPA working group. This working group convened an international workshop and has proposed new criteria for diagnosis and classification of ABPA. And this is the new criteria for the diagnosis of ABPA. As you can see that the criteria specifies the exact number of components that should be present to make a diagnosis. It offers more weightage to the more important components. For example, the specific IgE and the total IgE have been given more weightage compared to others, and it offers the specific cutoff values for the IgE and eosinophil counts. Now, in this study, we looked at the diagnostic performance of various tests that have been used in the diagnosis of ABPA. So, based on the study, what we found was the most sensitive test in the diagnosis of ABPA was the Aspergillus fumigatus specific IgE. In fact, at a cutoff of 0.35 kilounit of antibodies per liter, it has a sensitivity of 100%, making this test the preferred test for screening asthmatic patients for ABPA. So, the important take home message here is that you will not miss any case of ABPA if the specific IgE is less than 0.35 KUA per liter. Aspergillus skin test was previously advocated as the screening test of choice for ABPA. It has a sensitivity of only 95%, meaning that you will miss 1 in 5 patients for every 100 patients screened, and currently it is no longer the preferred test for ABPA screening. The total serum IgE is another useful test in the investigation of ABPA. In fact, a normal serum IgE excludes active ABPA as the cause of the patient's current symptoms. While the sensitivity of the test is good, it is about 97%, the specificity is only 38%, meaning that if you use total IgE, you are likely to pick up more noise than signal. So, it is not a good screening test for the diagnosis of ABPA. It, however, remains an important tool in the follow-up of patients because an increase in Ig level may signify an impending exacerbation. In this study, we looked at the role of total IgE and specific IgE against Aspergillus fumigatus for monitoring treatment responses in ABPA. As you can see, what we found here was that the total IgE consistently declined following treatment, and consistently increased during an exacerbation, while the responses of specific IgE were erratic. So this indicates that specific IgE should only be used in the diagnosis of ABPA, while in the follow-up, the total IgE should be used and not the specific IgE. The serum precipitating antibodies against Aspergillus fumigatus has been one of the earliest immunological tests used in the diagnosis of ABPA. Unfortunately, precipitants detected using the double diffusion method has a sensitivity of only 27%, while specific IgG against Aspergillus fumigatus detected using enzyme immunoassay has a sensitivity of almost 89%. So an important take home message here is one should use Aspergillus fumigatus specific IgG in preference to serum precipitants. Serum galactomannan, which is a very useful test in the diagnosis of invasive pulmonary aspergillosis, has no utility in ABPA. In one study, we found that the sensitivity of this test was only 26%. A peripheral blood eosinophil count more than 1000 cells per microliter has been used as a major criteria in the diagnosis of ABPA. In a study of 209 ABPA patients, we found that almost 60% of the patients of ABPA had an eosinophil count less than 1000 cells, and almost 25% has counts less than 500. In our experience, eosinophil count is often used to screen asthmatic patients for ABPA, and in my opinion, it is one of the most important causes for misdiagnosis, especially in the Indian subcontinent. So an important take home message here is that please do not use eosinophil count as a screening test for ABPA. Coming to the chest radiograph can be normal in almost 50% of cases of ABPA, and obviously it should not be used for screening of ABPA. But on the other hand, it is essential for follow-up because certain radiographic features that occur during acute episodes clear up during remission, which we call as the fleeting opacities, and that is why chest radiograph is a useful tool in the follow-up of patients. The CT scan of the chest is the investigation of choice in the radiological work of patients with ABPA. In this context, it is important to obtain a thin section or a high resolution CT of the chest and not a contrast enhanced CT. On the CT scans, the most common abnormality is bronchiectasis. However, the most pathognomonic feature of ABPA is high attenuation mucus. This is defined as mucus which is visually denser than the paraspinal skeletal muscle. Some patients with ABPA can manifest with normal CT scans of the chest, and these patients are classified as serological ABPA. So this is a classical chest radiograph which shows the finger in glove opacities, which is seen in the left upper lobe. This is the lung window of the CT scan of the chest. On the right lung fields, you can see dilated bronchiectatic cavities which are empty, while on the left lung fields you see dilated bronchiectatic cavities which are filled with mucus. These are also known as bronchoceles. Now this is what I was alluding to. This is high attenuation mucus. As you can see here, in the left lung field, you can see mucus which is visually denser than the paraspinal skeletal muscle, and this is the most characteristic finding of ABPA. As I was telling that we have the newer Isham working group diagnostic criteria for ABPA. In my opinion, if we make certain minor modifications to this criteria, for example, if we take off Aspergillus skin test and we remove serum precipitants from this criteria will become even more sensitive. So now coming to the screening protocol which should be used in the clinic. Basically, you screen all patients of bronchial asthma with the Aspergillus fumigatus specific IgE. And all patients, I mean, this should be the norm in the tertiary care or in special asthma or chest clinics. In primary health care or in secondary health care, we can screen only the patients who have moderately controlled or poorly controlled asthma. So once the specific IgE is more than 0.35 kilounit of antibodies per liter, we then perform total IgE. If the total IgE is more than 500 international units per ml, we perform other investigations including eosinophil count, specific IgG against Aspergillus fumigatus, and CT scan of the chest. Based on the CT scan, we can classify patients of ABPA into ABPA with high attenuation mucus, ABPA with bronchiectasis, and if the CT is normal, we classify these patients as serological ABPA. Because this disorder has a remitting and relapsing nature and there is propensity for developing serious complication, we need to have a clinical framework to stage the disease. The previously used staging system was the Patterson staging, which classified ABPA into 5 stages, and unfortunately this was all the 5 stages. There was no objective definitions for each of the stages. So taking cognizance of this fact, the ABPA working group has now classified ABPA into 7 stages. So we have stage 0 to stage 6. Stage 0 to 1 is seen in patients who have not been treated yet, whereas stages 2 to 5 are defined in patients who have received treatment. Stage 6 is advanced ABPA, which is defined as the presence of cor pulmonale or chronic type 2 respiratory failure along with the presence of extensive bronchiectasis, which signifies the advanced stage of this disorder. Coming to stages 2 to 5, stage 2 is defined as a response stage in which there is clinical and radiological improvement following treatment along with decline in IgE by at least 25% of baseline at 8 weeks of treatment. Exacerbation is on the other hand defined as clinical or radiological worsening accompanied by an increase in IgE which increases by more than 50% from the new baseline. Remission is defined as sustained clinical radiological improvement with IgE levels remaining at or below the new baseline for at least 6 months of any form of treatment for ABPA. Now treatment dependent ABPA is defined as 2 or more relapses which occur within 6 months of stopping treatment, or you have a patient where there is deterioration in the clinical and or radiological condition, or there is immunological worsening once you start tapering the steroids or azoles. Now coming to the final part of discussion in ABPA, which is treatment of ABPA. The current principles of therapy include the institution of anti-inflammatory therapy, primarily systemic glucocorticoids to control the immunological activity. One can also use antifungal agents to attenuate the fungal burden in the airways. Now coming to glucocorticoid therapy, 2 doses have been used in literature, the low dose regime and the high dose regime, and these are the doses for each of these regimes. There was a belief that the high dose regime will be associated with lower propensity to develop glucocorticoid dependent ABPA. So in a randomized controlled trial, we compared these 2 doses of glucocorticoids in patients with acute stages of ABPA complicating asthma. So 92 subjects of ABPA were randomized to receive either high dose or low dose glucocorticoids. Interestingly, we found that the numbers of subjects with exacerbation after 1 year and glucocorticoid dependent ABPA after 2 years were similar in the 2 groups. The improvement in lung function and the time to first exacerbation was also similar in the 2 groups. The side effects were significantly higher in the high dose group. This suggests that low dose steroids is as effective as high dose steroids in the management of ABPA. The only caveat is that a small proportion of patients, about 13% of patients, did not have an adequate early response to low dose steroids. Thus, if you use low-dose steroids, the initial treatment needs to be closely monitored. Two randomized controlled trials have also evaluated azoles in allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. In the first study, 55 steroid-dependent patients were randomized to receive either oral itraconazole 400 milligrams per day or placebo. While the difference between the two groups was significant in the composite outcome, which included one of the either three, but it did not attain any significance when each outcome was examined separately. In the other randomized trial, 29 clinically stable ABPA patients were randomized to receive again oral itraconazole or placebo. In this study also, almost 1/3 of the patients were on oral steroids. Again, here the use of itraconazole led to a decline in sputum inflammatory markers, serum Ig, and the number of exacerbations warranting steroid therapy. The major drawback of both these studies, apart from their small sample size, is that neither of the study reported long-term outcomes in terms of relapses of ABPA. Moreover, the efficacy of itraconazole was found to be about 60% as a steroid sparing agent. So with this evidence, itraconazole is currently used at the doses of 200 milligrams twice daily for at least 4 to 6 months. The indication being the first exacerbation of ABPA to maintain remission, or in patients with glucocorticoid dependent ABPA as a steroid sparing agent. Newer azoles such as voriconazole and posaconazole or aerosolized amphotericin B can also be used in ABPA. These therapies are, however, reserved in patients with poor response to itraconazole or in patients who encounter adverse effects with the use of itraconazole. The pulse doses of methylprednisolone, which is defined as doses of methylprednisolone at 15 milligrams per kilogram per day, can be used in two situations: in patients who have ABPA exacerbations which are refractory to oral glucocorticoid therapy, or it is used as a steroid sparing agent in the pediatric population along with azoles to decrease the side effects associated with daily oral steroids. Nebulized amphotericin B can also be used as an agent to maintain remission once remission has been achieved with oral steroids. So in this pilot randomized trial, we tested the utility of this approach. 21 patients who had recurrent exacerbations but were currently stable with steroid therapy were randomized to receive either nebulized amphotericin B or nebulized budesonide alone. So both the group, however, received nebulized budesonide. While the time to first exacerbation was similar in the two groups, what we found was that at 1 year, the number of patients experiencing exacerbations were significantly lower in the nebulized amphotericin B arm. This suggests that in patients who have recurrent exacerbations, nebulized amphotericin B can be an interesting approach. Omalizumab is a monoclonal antibody against IgE. It is currently indicated in patients with severe asthma who are refractory to therapy with inhaled corticosteroids and long-acting beta-2 agonists. The utility of omalizumab has also been evaluated in allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. In this study published from Australia, 13 patients with chronic ABPA were randomized to treatment with either omalizumab or placebo. The authors used a very interesting approach wherein they used fixed doses of omalizumab at 375 milligrams every 2 weeks rather than using the doses targeting IgE. This is because in patients with ABPA, the IgE is elevated in hundreds of thousands, so it would not be possible to use that high doses of omalizumab. What the study found that not only the exacerbations were less frequent, the inflammatory response to the fungi was also significantly lower in patients receiving omalizumab. The only drawback of this study is that it's a pilot study comprising of only 13 patients and more data is required to test the utility of this approach. So this is the treatment protocol which can be used in the clinic. Patients with acute stage ABPA can be initiated on treatment with glucocorticoids for 4 months. They can be followed up. If the patients show good response, they can be followed up, and some of them will enter into the stage of remission. About 1/3 to 1/2 of the patients will experience an exacerbation, typically within 1 year, and in these patients one can initiate therapy with a combination of glucocorticoids plus itraconazole. About 1/3 of the patients who have exacerbations enter into a stage what is known as treatment dependence, and in these patients several of the approaches can be adopted, which can be either azoles, low dose glucocorticoids, methylprednisolone pulses, or nebulized amphotericin B. Follow-up is done with clinical examination, chest radiograph and total IG, which is done every 2 months to demonstrate improvement and to determine the new baseline IgE. So let's say the patient has an IgE of 10,000. You keep on following up the IgE every 2 months, and once the patient is fully stable, let's presume that the IgE is about 5,000. So that is the new baseline IgE for that individual patient, and a 50% increase in IgE from the new baseline. So let's say the patient has worsening of asthma and the IgE increases to say 7,800, which is more than 50% increase in IgE. This is known as an ABPA exacerbation. Needless to mention that one has to monitor all patients for adverse effects and monitor them for drug interactions. Now coming to allergic fungal rhinosinusitis, this entity can occur alone or can coexist with allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. If the patient with ABPA also have concomitant upper respiratory tract symptoms due to coexistent allergic fungal rhinosinusitis, this entity is known as cyanobronchial allergic mycosis syndrome or the CAM syndrome. Before we go into the details of AFRS or allergic fungal rhinosinusitis, let's briefly understand the categorization of fungal rhinosinusitis. Fungal rhinosinusitis is classified as invasive or non-invasive based on the histopathology, clinical findings and lab investigations. The invasive forms of FRS can be further classified into acute invasive, chronic invasive or the granulomatous invasive, and the non-invasive forms are classified into sinus mycetoma and the eosinophil related fungal rhinosinusitis, of which AFRS is an important subgroup. Coming to acute invasive fungal rhinosinusitis, this is a potentially fatal condition which affects the immunocompromised patient. In this, the fungus invades the sinuses and from the sinuses enters into the brain with fatal consequences. On the other hand, granulomatous invasive forms of FRS is seen in patients who have moderate degrees of immunocompromise. In this, the disorder goes longer than the acute invasive, which allows the formation of granuloma, but again, if untreated, this can again have an intracranial extension and can again be fatal. Now coming to eosinophil related forms of fungal rhinosinusitis, this can be classified into 3 forms: the allergic fungal rhinosinusitis or AFRS, in which we are interested, and a closely related entities known as the eosinophilic fungal rhinosinusitis and eosinophilic mucin rhinosinusitis. So coming to AFRS, this is diagnosed based on the Benton-Kuhn criteria, in which you have characteristic upper respiratory tract symptoms along with the characteristic CT findings and demonstration of allergic mucin without mucosal invasion from a sinus sample, which is acquired through a surgical procedure known as FES or functional endoscopic sinus surgery. Moreover, the culture of the sinus content should document the particular fungi. A closely related entity is the eosinophilic fungal rhinosinusitis. In this entity, it was demonstrated that the toxic major basic protein from the eosinophil level was very high, and it could damage the nasal epithelium and predispose the patients to concomitant bacterial infection. Therefore, the question remains whether is EFRS a separate entity or is it just one of the non-allergic manifestation of EFRS. Another closely related entity is eosinophilic mucin rhinosinusitis. In this, you have the typical histopathological findings of AFRS, but there is no fungi here. So, it is believed that this is a eosinophilic response to yet unknown antigen. Whether it is some form of fungi which we are yet not identified or whether it is some other antigen remains unclear. So, there are several controversies surrounding this entity. This is because in certain cases of AFRS, the fungi are sparse and the detection becomes difficult, and it may lead a patient of AFRS to being diagnosed as EMRS. So, in this slide, if one misses the fungi which is seen in the center of the field, this AFRS would be classified as EMRS. Moreover, in a prospective study which was conducted at the PGI Chandigarh, it was found that there was considerable overlap between AFRS, EFRS and EMRS. However, no difference of therapy is predicted. So, coming back to our patient with ABPA, patients with ABPA can have coexistent AFRS, and these are known as cyanobronchial allergic mycosis syndrome, and this is one of our patients in which high attenuation mucus is seen both in the chest CT as well as in the sinus CT. Some of the patients can have intra-orbitile extension, and this is one of our patients who presented with proptosis and had both ABPA and AFRS. So, here you can see this is a MR of the brain in which you can see that the inflammatory mass has extended from the sinuses and has invaded the left orbit with associated proptosis. Now, coming to the management of AFRS, the primary management of AFRS, unlike ABPA, is surgical debridement and aeration of the sinuses with functional endoscopic sinus surgery. Most patients will receive preoperative steroids for about 2 weeks, followed by steroids for at least 2 to 5 months after surgery. The treatment, however, has to be lifelong. Most patients will receive intranasal steroids and saline irrigation. Some patients will have recurrent symptoms, and short bursts of oral steroids are required in those with troublesome symptoms. In contrast to allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, azoles have little or no role in AFRS. So, in summary, one needs to maintain a high index of suspicion for ABPA in asthma, irrespective of the severity or the level of control. For this, one needs to screen all asthmatic patients with a specific IgE against Aspergillus fumigatus, in preference to Aspergillus skin test. This is important because we want to diagnose patients before they develop extensive bronchiectasis. Please use specific IgG in preference to Aspergillus precipitans. Please do not screen patients of asthma with eosinophil count. Total serum IgE and chest radiograph are not useful for screening, but they are important tools in the follow-up of ABPA. Glucocorticoids are the treatment of choice, and finally, more research is required for defining a particular form of therapy in specific subgroup of patients. On the other hand, AFRS can complicate the course of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. Imaging, histopathology of endoscopic biopsy specimen and specific IgE helps in the diagnosis of AFRS. The management is more or less similar to ABPA. However, steroids are more likely to be useful than azole therapy in patients with AFRS. So this brings me to the end of this module. Thank you for your kind attention.